What's up friends, glad you're back. Today I want to run through how to choose a sleeping bag for lightweight backpacking. When selecting a sleeping bag or a quilt, there's 4 things that you need to think about: styles, materials, temperature rating, and sizing. We'll go through things in that order, and then at the end I'll go through my gear choices and the sleeping bags that I use so that you can get a better understanding of my system. And that's not to say that my system is the best or anything like that, it's just that if you're new to it, I figure that seeing what somebody else is doing might help. So up first is the style of the bag that you want. Very broadly speaking, you have mummy bags, quilts, and hoodless sleeping bags. There's lots of different variations on these out there. You know, you can see sleeping bags that are basically like full body suits with arms and legs and things like that. But for the most part, this is what you can expect to come across as you're shopping around for a new sleeping bag. First up is the mummy bag, and this is what you think of as a traditional sleeping bag. You know, it's fully enclosed, it's got the hood that goes over your face, it cinches down to about this small, and really it's what you'll see when you look for sleeping bags at any big store like an REI or something like that. And because of these attributes, what you can expect with a mummy bag is, first off, it's going to be pretty much foolproof. You're completely enclosed, so there's not a lot of room for air to get in. It's also going to be the heaviest of the bunch because, again, it's got all of this extra material and insulation that's wrapping around your body. And along the same lines, it's also going to be the least compact when you compress it in your pack. This type of sleeping bag is going to be best for colder temperatures where you need that head and neck protection, and wearing a beanie or a balaclava or something like that simply won't suffice. Mummy bags are also great for people that value coziness and they just want to be fully wrapped up in a cloud of down. If that's you, do your thing. As far as mummy bags are concerned, some great companies to check out if you're interested in picking one up are Z-Packs and Montbell. I have sleeping bags from both and I love them. I've also heard great things about Western mountaineering as well, but I don't actually own any of their gear, so can't really vouch for them. But based on what I hear from other people, you should definitely go ahead and check them out if you're in the market. We got people coming, so we have to wait. And style number 2 is the quilt. If you haven't seen one before, this is nothing like your quilt at home. It's basically a sleeping bag that does away with the hood as well as the insulation on the back side of the bag that would normally get compressed when you're laying on it. And theoretically, this is the lightest option. And I say theoretically because if you're an active sleeper or somebody that likes to sleep on their side or on their stomach, you're going to need to get a wider quilt, which in theory kind of negates the whole weight savings in the first place. That said, this design is going to be best for people that are non-active back sleepers. If that's you and you feel like this might be an avenue that you want to pursue, you're really going to have 2 options when it comes to quilt styles, which is going to be the open or closed footbox. A closed footbox is just like on a sleeping bag where the foot end is completely closed up so that drafts can't get in, whereas an open footbox has a little cinch cord on it and either buttons or a zipper so that you can open up the bag entirely just like a blanket on warmer nights. The open footbox is nice because of the versatility, but it can also be a little bit drafty, whereas the closed footbox is better for people that are prone to cold tootsies. This is the sleep system of choice for lots of thru hikers and ultralight backpackers, and if it's something that you're interested in, check out Z-Packs or Enlightened Equipment. The third and final style that we'll cover is the hoodless sleeping bag, and this is kind of like a mix between a mummy bag and a quilt. It still has a full-length zipper on it, just like a mummy bag, and it usually goes down the back. However, it skips the hood since most of us are carrying a beanie anyway. This is my sleeping bag style of choice for most conditions because I am a pretty active sleeper, so I like knowing that I'm fully enclosed, but also I really don't need the extra head insulation of a mummy bag in most conditions. Again, if you're interested in picking one up, both Enlightened Equipment and Z-Packs are great options. One thing to note though, as we're discussing different styles of sleeping bags, is something that you're going to come across as you're doing your shopping is the idea of a draft tube or a draft collar. These are additional strips of down-filled material that cover the zipper on sleeping bags and the neck closure on quilts and hoodless sleeping bags. This is a great feature to help prevent drafts from getting in while you're sleeping, and it's typically only found in down gear, not synthetic. The next thing that we have to talk about is the material that your sleeping bag or quilt is going to be made of. And 2 concepts that we want to run through are fabric denier and insulation types. All right, first up is denier, and there's no way that I'm going to nail this definition off the top of my head, so I'm just going to read it off my phone. Denier, a unit of measure for the linear mass density of fibers, is the mass in grams per 9,000 meters of the fiber. The denier is based on a natural reference. A single strand of silk is approximately 1 denier. A 9,000 meter strand of silk weighs about 1 gram. So there you go. In other words, denier is used to express the thickness of the individual fibers that make up the shell material. The higher the denier, the thicker the material. This also translates to more durability, greater wind resistance, less breathability, and more weight. As you go down in denier, things become less durable, lighter, more compressible, and more breathable. Usually when shopping around for lightweight options, you can expect to see anything from 7 up to 20 denier. Again, this is a generalization. There are definitely going to be products outside of that, but that's what you can expect. Personally, I think 7D is fine, and it's what I prefer in my sleeping bags. It's nice and light, it's very breathable, so I don't have to worry about condensation issues, and for the most part, I haven't really had any issues with durability. Just don't be that person that needs to get a picture of themselves, you know, drinking coffee, standing up in their sleeping bag on top of a rock. You probably will put a hole in it. Next up, insulation, and you really have two choices. It comes down to down or synthetic. Broadly speaking, down is going to be lighter than synthetic insulation. It's also more compressible, and it generally lasts longer. With synthetic insulation, it tends to lose loft the more that it's compressed over time, so, you know, over seasons or years of use, whereas with down, it's much more resilient to that compression. So with a synthetic sleeping bag, you may get years of regular use out of it before it finally stops insulating as well, whereas with down, it could very well last you a lifetime. And something very important to note with down as you're shopping around is the concept of fill power. Again, reading from my notes, fill power is the measure of volume 30 grams or 1.1 ounces of down displaces in a cylinder. So what that means is that warmth is determined by the amount of airspace that's created by the insulating material, in this case, down. The higher the fill power, the less down is actually required to fill the same amount of space. Therefore, the higher the fill power, the less weight and more easily compressible the bag will be for the same temperature rating. In other words, higher fill power is warmer and more compressible by weight, but it's also more expensive. Typically, you'll see anything from 600 to 1000 fill power, and I'd recommend 800 fill power and up. I find that this is the sweet spot in terms of cost and weight. But by all means, if you can spring for 900 or 1000 fill power, definitely go for it, because it's awesome to have a 20-degree sleeping bag that smushes up to like this big. And the second insulation material is synthetic. The nice thing about synthetic is that it resists moisture and humidity much better than down. So if you live in a wet or damp environment, it might be for you. Personally, I live in the Pacific Northwest and I still use down because for the most part, I haven't found condensation or humidity buildup to really be that much of a trip ender for me. But if you're going to be out for a really long time in cold, wet environments, you might want to look into synthetic insulation. Another plus is that it's way easier to clean. You can just throw it in the washing machine like you would anything else, whereas with down, it is definitely a little bit more of a process. And last but not least, synthetic is significantly less expensive than down, often about half the price. Personally, I recommend down because you're gonna have it for a lifetime as long as you take care of it. And if for whatever reason you do need synthetic insulation for a trip, you can always just pick it up at a later time. And part number 3 is temperature rating. So something that you need to know is that the temperature rating of a sleeping bag that you see on the bag or in the name is based on the average person wearing base layers, and there's not really much standardization to all of this. Also, oftentimes companies will round this number to give the bag a catchier name. So if a sleeping bag is good down to, let's say, 19 degrees, companies will often market this as a 15-degree sleeping bag because 15 is a nice round number and it sounds better than 19. Also, everyone just sleeps different. So if you know that you sleep cold, you might want to get a warmer sleeping bag. Me personally, I hike warm and I sleep cold, so I normally try to take a sleeping bag that's at least 10 degrees warmer than the nighttime low that I expect to encounter. Also, typically you'll see 2 temperature ratings on a sleeping bag. One is going to be the comfort limit, and this is the bag's actual rating. This is what you should be, well, comfortable down to, assuming again that you're an average sleeper as defined by whatever company that you're buying this from. After that, you have the limit rating or the extreme rating. There's all sorts of different things that they call them, but this is basically how low can you take it, you know, before you die. Well, maybe not die, but you get the idea. Become incredibly uncomfortable, possibly hypothermic. And the final thing that you'll want to consider here is sizing. And for the most part, this is pretty straightforward, and you can just go with the manufacturer's recommendations for somebody with your measurements. In most cases, you're gonna have a handful of options for length and width. There are a couple of caveats though. The first being to consider sizing up in width if you're a side sleeper, a stomach sleeper, or a particularly active sleeper. Also, you can consider sizing up in length if you want to be able to bring your gear in with you, especially during the colder months, to keep it warm. That said, the warmest sleeping bag for you is going to be the one that fits your body shape the best, because the less air that is in there with you means less air that you have to heat up and keep warm all night long. So you'll sleep warmer. When in doubt, just reach out to customer service with your sizing questions. I do this literally all the time. I'm pretty sure my name is on like a board or a wall somewhere as that annoying customer that's always asking questions about everything. Shout out to Monica and Z-Packs customer service. All right, so at this point, I want to talk about my system for sleeping bags. And just to reiterate, this is not necessarily the best way of doing things. This is just what I have found works well for me, so take it with a grain of salt. First off, I'm a big fan of having a 3 sleeping bag system where each sleeping bag is staggered by 20 degrees to get me through all 4 seasons. Now, I realize not everybody can go out and buy 3 sleeping bags right now. Also, not all of my bags are staggered by exactly 20 degrees. These are just the closest temperature ratings to that I could find in the sleeping bags that I wanted. So the first one is a Montbell Down Hugger 45-degree sleeping bag that I use for summer. If I could do it all over again, I probably would have gotten a quilt of some kind, just because I definitely don't need a hood for summer, but the bag is so lightweight and compact that I don't really see any point in replacing it right now. My second sleeping bag is my Z-Packs Classic 20-degree sleeping bag, and this is what I use for most 3-season conditions. This sleeping bag is made out of a 7D shell material, and I did develop a small tear in it at one point. I went to go move the sleeping bag, and I was still sitting on it or something like that, and I ripped one of the seams slightly. I sent it back to Z-Packs, and they repaired and reinforced the area under warranty. So again, nothing but good things to say about their customer service. And then my third sleeping bag is my Montbell 7-degree mummy bag. It's like sleeping in a cloud. It's certainly not the lightest bag on the market, but it does have draft collars around both the neck and along the zipper, so it keeps me nice and toasty during the winter. And another cool feature about these bags, and same with my 45-degree Montbell bag, is that the baffles are actually slightly stretchy, so it sort of compresses around your body and keeps you nice and toasty, but it stretches when you want to move around, which is really, really nice. So if I had to pick or recommend one sleeping bag for you to start out with in terms of temperature rating, I would say start with a 20 or a 30-degree sleeping bag if you're somebody who sleeps a little bit warmer. This is going to get you through the majority of 3-season conditions, and even in summer, unless you live in the deep south or something like that where it's incredibly hot and humid at night, it really isn't so incredibly warm that it's uncomfortable. You can always kick a foot out or roll it down or whatever. And finally, if you're new to lightweight backpacking and want to learn how to camp with a tarp, check out this video next.